Hello, welcome to Shelby Radio. I am Shelby Carino, and this is episode number 726. And today, how do you know your body is finally out of survival mode? I am so excited to finally get to a podcast episode about this topic, because that means I have gotten there in my world. Okay. And it has been a long journey. And this is not a hypothetical conversation. This is hey, this is probably happening to you, has happened to you, or is going to happen to you at some point in time, even if it doesn't even seem like it's even reachable, okay? And I'm going to get into that in this episode today. So welcome. I'm glad you are here. I just have to begin by saying that as I'm piggybacking off of the last 4 weeks of episodes that have had to do with all of the experiences that I've been having since I resigned from my teaching job, December 18th of 2025, it is also coinciding with really a 10-year cycle that I've been in with my own life, with Joe, and just merging our lives together and clearing out a lot of my masculine shadow parts, and for him, feminine shadow parts, as a couple. But then tied into that was a lot of individual pieces that didn't even have to do with him, and vice versa. And then death energy in there. I mean, it's just been a lot. Okay, so I've come to this realization that for years, my body hadn't actually been living. It was actually defending itself. And that was a part in me that somewhere I knew that, but I didn't know how to change it. I only knew how to just get up every day and keep doing what I was doing. But because when I met Joe and entered into a relationship, I was no longer obviously single, just looking at my own crap. You know what I mean? I was looking at my crap through another person now. And my life, dating all the way back into childhood, I was defensive because I always felt like I was being picked on or misunderstood, or, defending myself up against my sister and those, sibling types of relationships. And then when I got with Joe and I externally was seeing verbal language from Joe, how he would say to me that, well, yes, my whole life I've had to defend myself. I've always been on the defensive because there's been all these people who have worked very diligently to try to take me down or make things difficult, or, whatever the case may be. So this masculine part outside of myself began speaking about being defensive. And then I had to realize, oh, wow, well, in my feminine part growing up, I was always defensive. So now here we were in this relationship of over a decade, working through these defensive mechanisms in ourselves. So our bodies went into a defensive posture energetically with our spine. And when that happens, it pushes a lot of that energy into the stomach, which is where I was looking pregnant all the time. Joe looking pregnant all the time, because that's that defensive energy in the nervous system that's always bracing itself for the next fight or flight response in our world. And it didn't necessarily have to do with us in the relationship. It was a lot of external things that we were having to defend ourselves on, not necessarily defending ourselves to each other, if that makes sense. So I've come to this clear realization as my body is shifting back into a new state of normalcy that, wow, my body was never really relaxing, which I knew, but it comes through differently, when you're getting to the other side. And then I was like, and this is not even just emotionally or physically. This is like biologically, like biologically, my body has been under stress, okay, fine, since I was born, right? But sometimes you don't even realize this survival mode that you're in until you're no longer in it. And then everything just kind of collapses in on itself and you begin seeing this new perspective of what's really been going on in your world, which is what obviously I've been moving through. So for me, when I resigned from teaching, I didn't just leave a job that I had for 6 months, okay? I was quitting a war within me, okay? Not even within the job, but within me. And it was just showing up outside of me to show me I was done with the war. So I never really realized how long my body had been bracing for life, okay, until it finally began to not brace so much. And then that was this weird feeling like over the last 4 weeks, I've been like, I'm not as tense. I'm not as on guard. I'm not scanning the room and in my psychic field, the way I used to. I'm really settling, which is what I talked about last week, is that when peace comes in, it settles. So it's this subtle energy of just settled peacefulness. Okay. And it's occurring more than it's not occurring. All right. So I've learned through my experience that survival mode looked this way to me. It may not look this way to you, but it looked this way to me. Okay. I was always having to prepare for the next hit. The next energetic hit. Because back in 2011, when my Kundalini energy flipped and my energy changed overnight, I never truly realized how much my psychic energy was on alert. Okay? Because I didn't know enough to understand what was going on at the time. And then when I met Joe, and Joe would use the language, especially when we were going through all this stuff with his mother and that side of the family, I realized in his language, he was saying, well, yeah, I've never been able to relax because I've always had to prepare for the next hit. And I remember when he said that to me one time, I was like, what? Like, who thinks that way? Like in my head, I was like, huh? Like it didn't make sense to me because I was living in this rose-colored glasses like, oh, well, I never did that. And then my masculine outside of myself was like, yeah, I was always preparing for the next hit. And I was like, oh, wait a minute. Maybe that explains what I've been doing, you know? And he just finally put it into words. And then I started noticing what he was talking about, because then it manifested as we went through all of this stuff with his mother and that side of the family and those siblings and all of that. I was like, wow. And then I realized, oh my God, he's been dealing with this his whole life, you know, because he got taken away from his dad and grew up around, you know, the coven of sisters of his mother, and then literally back in the day married his mother through the ex-wife, and then that's a shit show of a whatever. If you've ever listened to my podcast episodes, you know a lot about that. And I was just like, good God, you know, like, so I just literally started noticing, you know, yeah, like he's been around women who've literally like always tried to take him out on a mental, emotional, spiritual, you know, level. And so I understood, I finally understood that piece, you know, because I realized, wow, you know, this is how you brace for survival, because you do just over time you learn, oh, this is coming in and hitting me, this is coming in and hitting me. I mean, think about people who are physically abused. I was physically abused back in the day with a relationship I was in that I didn't know he was an alcohol and drug addict at the time. This was my early 20s, and you know, it took me a couple of times, you know, of him being physically abusive and hitting me that, you know, like all of a sudden I learned to brace myself. Like if he got irritated, or I was like, ugh, or if he was coming down off of a high, or I was like, you know, I was in that bracing mode. So that's survival. Like you're not thriving every time you're bracing. Okay. Cause you're preparing for something to come in and basically hurt you. Right. And that brings the tension. You know, you're always holding on to the tension, or you're always having to stay really alert and sharp in your surroundings, because you can't afford to let your guard down because you don't know what's coming in, right? So that's that being on the edge all the time. Even if the moments are good, you're still on the edge. And so how many of us out here do that? Because in our lives somewhere, this really isn't anxiety as much as it's a very long-term conditioning of how our nervous system has had to react. So it's not even that we've been broken. It's more so that we were trained by our life circumstances that this is how our nervous system had to be conditioned. And then now we've labeled it as anxiety. And it's because we've always had to learn, oh, I must stay ready because something's always coming that I need to defend myself on. And now it's like, no, you don't. When you move through those processes of yourself, and it takes time for your nervous system to learn a new way of conditioning, okay? And if it learned to be on alert, well, then it can learn not to be on alert. Because no matter what, the information's going to come in if you're in danger, or there is something that's legitimate that you need to be aware of, okay? But once you move through your own, what I call internal, personal defensive mechanisms, then your channel of communication intuitively to hear and see and feel things that are necessary to come in if you would truly be in danger, then those areas of your communications just get heightened. So then you would really pay attention to that, because then you know it's universal. Like, oh, now I really need to pay attention to this because this isn't mixing with all of my personal shit. Okay. So this is why this process of ascension is so beautiful and messy at the same time, because you have to destroy your past, okay, of how you had that nervous system trained in order to reinvent it, okay? And it does take going through those experiences in life that make us feel so broken so we can reharmonize what it really needs to be. That was a lot. Did you feel that one? I felt that one. Okay. I had to learn that there was this thing that was invisible to me. Okay? It was this invisible way that I had to learn to brace myself. And I didn't even know I was doing it. I just thought I was just living life, okay? And being an empath and being sensitive. And I was. I mean, there were those aspects of me in there. But when you're going through a deep purge of yourself, okay, it's a little different. So everything for me was showing up after I resigned from the job, because that was me going back into the matrix. That was me putting everything on Front Street with myself. And even when I resigned, and I shared several weeks ago about I resigned on the 18th, but school was out for the Christmas break. So nothing changed in my world necessarily, because I was just on break with everybody else. But when school began back, my body, still thought I was going back. So it immediately was bracing for my return and bracing for that impact, to go back. Even if my mind was moving away from the situation, my body had not yet caught up to what my mind was already moving through. So if my nervous system had been running on a pattern of memory, because that's what I had installed in my life for 6 months, that was that memory that I was doing day after day after day, and none of this was logical because it was in my memory of behavior, then even if that danger for myself of having to brace myself for impact was leaving my system, my body was still like, I don't know about this. We don't have enough new patterns built back into our system yet for me to come down off of my watchtower. And so this is why some people out here, maybe you, if you've ever left something in your world, why it seems like it's hard to relax when you're finally okay. Because there's this gap, there's this void, between the two dynamics of your world that you haven't put back into place yet. So that's why for me, those first 2 weeks when school had gotten back in session, I felt like I was tasking still, but I was tasking differently. So it began the night before school started, like I talked about, I think last week, was, I told my husband, you need to call your best friend who has the marketing firm. I'm ready to market my company. Like that was exactly what I went into. That's what I installed in my new pattern. Instead of going back to the bricks and mortar school building, I installed, okay, I'm hiring a marketing firm for my business now. I'm ready to take this to a whole other level. And then I put in my Pilates. So I put in doing my Pilates every day in the morning. I put in my nutritional supplements again. I was putting in the massages. I was putting in, okay, we're going to Isla Mujeres. I need to go online and begin pulling the energies in for our trip. And What do we need? Okay, we're going to be around coral reef, whatever. We need the blue lizard sunscreen, or I was getting the suitcases out. Like I was beginning to pull in different things that were more pleasurable, less stressful, less intense. But I utilized those 2 weeks that school had been back in session, and that's where I was doing a lot of tasking. So by week 3, I was at, oh wow, I'm really not going back into the school system. I'm really not going back to that school. I'm not doing this anymore. Like, then the belief system began coming in as the reality that, oh wow, this really isn't happening. This really now is my new life. And then it started changing how my body began feeling. I didn't feel like I was just constantly on guard. My stomach wasn't as bloated, as much. It still was, but I didn't feel like by the 3rd and 4th week, really, it was more of, I don't feel as much like I'm a puffer fish. And it's just been this slow progression of my energy body letting its guard down, where I don't have to carry that energy, which made me honestly, carry weight with that. So, anyway, moving on from that, this beautiful wisdom that I've gained from this experience I've been going through is because I had put 3 weeks worth of energy into the school that I resigned from because of the lesson plans and the things that I had pre-planned for the next person, then I used that last surge of energy that I had put into the school building with what I had done, and I used it to organize my life now, which is what I just talked about, and those things that I did to complete certain projects, because that's how I was drawing the energy back. And I was able to clean up a lot of loose ends that I hadn't been able to do over the last 6 to 8 months when my energy was really tied up in the job, and honestly in the last decade of everything that I had been moving through in our life. Okay. So this is a very common nervous system experience when you begin to downshift into leaving survival mode and going into thrival mode. So it's like driving a stick shift, and you go all the way up into the highest gear and you're cruising along, and then all of a sudden you don't just go from 5th gear to 1st gear, because that would be like that'd be an intense drop. You downshift, 5th to 4th to 3rd to the 2nd to the 1st. Okay. And then you stop. So it's the same thing in the nervous system. You have to downshift your patterning, and while your body is releasing those last drops of adrenaline, because we use that adrenaline to survive, it's a process. And that's what I noticed, especially those first 2 weeks, that adrenaline was leaving in that last wave of, what do I need to do and be very, very productive and be very, very task oriented. Okay. And it was like my system was saying to myself, okay, I need to finish this mission. I need to finish this mission that I'm on of myself. And that was my reframe. And I was basically burning out in that reframe a specific season in my life that had to do with teaching. And I was doing it in a very powerful manner because I was putting back in my power. Let me say that again. I was reframing a 6-month, but honestly longer timeline of a season of what teaching was in my world. And I was doing it in a powerful manner because I was bringing back in my power, because I was letting go of survival, and I was putting back in thrival, and I was putting things back in for myself that was powerful for me, instead of giving it out in the world of others or situations the way I had done always in the past. Okay? It was a complete reframe. So this is why the body, and why my body has needed to move through this physical letting go process. And so what I did is, when I felt it in my intuition, I scheduled a massage. And we have this amazing massage therapist. Oh my gosh. She is not your traditional masseuse where you just go in for a Swedish massage and she just rubs you just so it feels good, right? And then she does some deep muscle work. No. She is so connected to your body and you, like the energy of you. And she has developed her technique so well that she goes in and does the deep fascia work, which really helps get things out of the muscles and loosens things up. And she really works your hips and your glutes and just everything where you store stress. How she works the spine. I mean, she is incredible. And so I knew, okay, we were leaving to go to Isla Mujeres. And I knew I need at least 3 sessions with her before we leave, because my body needed to go through a process of it being touched and moving things physically with my body that I wasn't going to be able to do energetically. I needed someone who was talented to come in and break up all of those things in my system. So I realized, and then I balanced it with going to our subtle chiropractor who does the energy clearings and the subtle chiropractic, that if your bones are out of balance, she has this way of doing things subtly where your body just kind of organically goes back into its normal positioning. So I was doing the massage first, and then the next day or two I would go to the chiropractor, and then it was working together. And then I had Joe begin doing that. I was like, okay, now you go, because if I'm releasing things that were probably some of Joe's energy in me for me to learn things, then I knew he had to release things in his body that were probably of me, so he could learn things. So we were at this also couple swap energetically. So I knew, okay, I've been in survival mode, and energy stores itself in our body. Okay, like it goes into our fascia, it goes into the muscles, it goes into our jaw, it goes into our hips and shoulders. And these are these nervous system pathways of where all of this stuff is stored. So I knew I can't talk my way through this in order for it to let go. I knew my body was going to need the touch. I knew it was going to need the movement. I knew that all of these safety signals needed to be addressed, that my body necessarily wasn't going to be pampered. It was more so going to be discharged of everything that had been on alert for. And where I knew things were really changing is because when Joe and I got together, we got together officially March of 2016, like 2 days before my birthday. So it was like March 2nd. Okay. And then we moved in together at the end of May of 2016, I think it was. And we moved into this house, this rental house, and we had 3 teenage boys at the time now living with us, okay? And there was just a lot going on. Well, I noticed when he and I merged and began living together that my right ear began closing up. Like I began to not be able to hear out of that ear. And it was weird because it was like an energetic closure. Well, the right side is the masculine side, female brain. And I keep remembering my mentor always saying to Joe, you need to listen to your female. You need to listen to your female, especially when we had gone to Hawaii on our Huna trip. You know, she just like, you need to listen to your female. Well, through this entire time, Joe and I have been together, and I had to really sit in his world of what women had done to him to keep him in survival mode of self and that constant defensiveness to not be able to trust women. Then I was realizing why he wasn't hearing them anymore, because they had taken so much of his innocence that they would use that against him. So he had developed a survival mechanism to shut off hearing women to possibly defend them not taking anything from him, right? So then when he and I got together and I would constantly repeat, okay, you need to listen to your female, you need to listen to your female. And he would be like, okay, you do understand in my past, like, anytime I listened to them, I got hurt, you know, or even if I wasn't even doing anything, things were being siphoned from me, you know, because women have that added energy and they can do very harmful things to men because men are just organically, by nature, innocent and trusting. And so I had to realize that. So I realized, oh, wow, okay, so in me, over a decade, I had closed off on my masculine side the female being able to hear. So I was like, okay, so my man outside of me, why I keep saying you need to listen to your female, he stopped listening to women, right? And I mean spiritual women, you know, like, you know, trusting their intuitions and things like that. So it was this interesting journey with Joe and myself for him to get to that level of trust with me. And so obviously there was that trust in me with him as well, you know, whatever that was on a higher spiritual level. So just last week, it was very interesting because, gosh, I don't know how many months ago, maybe it was a year or so ago, Joe had talked about how this one side of his, I can't remember what side it was. I don't know if it was the right or the left. I think it was the left. But anyway, there was a tooth in the back that was like really bothering him. And he couldn't chew on that side. And anyway, he went to the dentist and I kept saying, I think it's more energetic than it is like a cavity or anything like that. Well, a little over a week ago, I think it was now, I had this intense jaw pain that was coming from down, right, you know, right. If you're watching me on my YouTube channel, it started up here at my jawline and then it went down in, you know, down the jawline, and my face like blew up with like pimples, and it was like angry. And I had it on my forehead, and I run rosacea anyway, but it was like my forehead and in my cheeks. And it was just, I was just like, oh my God, what just let go out of my inner ear that just created this surge of rage that my face is like showing. And once I addressed that, then I had this stuff going on with my ear where it wasn't ringing necessarily. It was more like just a subtle hum. Like I could tell energetically, like things were moving in that ear. And then it was like moving down my jawline. And then I began seeing my mother, and I began seeing how she had TMJ, and I began seeing how her mother had issues with something like, I don't know, something. And then I began seeing how my mom dislocated her jaw at a karate camp we had gone to. And like I started seeing a lot of this mother stuff, which made sense because I was preparing, for the trip that we're on, in Isla Mujeres, because Isla Mujeres is the island of woman. It's the mother island. So in the year of the snake, still shedding energies, there was all of these things that were coming in from this ear thing. And then on top of that, I began seeing where it was linked with Joe. And so I said to him, I said, well, I haven't been able to hear out of that ear since basically we moved in together in that rental house. And he was like, well, yeah, our mentor was saying that, we're going to, come all the way back to the beginning in a huge way. So it made sense that I closed off that ear energetically for protection somewhere in order for me to go through all of these reframes over the last decade. And now everything is done and safe and harmonized. And now that pathway of energy is opening back up, and I'm like getting my hearing back on that side of my ear, not even realizing all of these years that it even wasn't existing because I could still hear out of the other one. You know what I mean? So it was just this weird dynamic, okay, was unfolding. So when I began the massages, then things were releasing and relaxing. And then one day I went and had a massage. It was a Friday, a couple Fridays ago, and my jaw in that back molar, when you chew gum and you feel like you just have a lot of energy like coming out your head or something, and you get a piece of gum and you're just like, you just want to bite down on it because you're just it's almost like you're trying to massage the nerves in your gums or something. That's how it felt. But if I clenched down or anything, it was like nerve pain. And I had it for maybe 8 to 12 hours, this intense nerve pain on my right side, that if I took a sip of anything cold, it took me one time to take a sip of water, it felt like every single nerve on the right side of my jaw was exposed. It was the most excruciating pain. I was just like, holy shit, this must be what it feels like to have your roots exposed or something. Like that was intense. And so after that massage that day, I literally lay down in the bed and it just was dull and it was aching and I could feel it in my ear. And then I was like, is this what happens with babies when they're born and they have ear problems and they go get tubes in their ears? Is this that overstimulation of energy, that spiritual energy that's coming in? Like that is I literally saw a baby. Like I went back and was like, oh my God, this has to be what that feels like, having that kind of sensitivity. No wonder it fucking hurts. And babies don't even have teeth. They just have the gums. So I was like, am I really going back into my babyhood somewhere? Like, but being psychic and being very open to the energies, I'm going to move through the energies so I can learn the energy. Okay. And I'm going to have the experience in some form or fashion. So after I had that massage that day, I just came home and I laid down for several hours, and it was just aching, and I didn't want to move it. And then finally about 1:30, I got up and took some aspirin, and then that helped subside a little bit. I made myself some hot tea because I was definitely not putting anything cold in my mouth. And then I didn't eat. And I literally sat on the couch and I binge watched the Kardashians. And I don't know why I do that. Anytime I go through a major reframe, it's like the Kardashians show back up, and I realized, oh, I missed season 6. So let me watch season 6 before I watch season 7. And it's probably just because of what I'm putting into my visual pictures of luxury and expansion. And I don't know, because I'm watching this episode where Chloe and Kim went to this $350 million wedding in Mumbai, India, for the richest family in India. And I was just like, oh my God. So I was just watching, it's a good time to put in true expansion of luxury, right? As I was going through this. So even Joe was like, why are we watching this? I'm like, I'm binge watching. Like I'm just, but this was me letting my nervous system just let go, put something purposeful into my visuals. Not that it was the Kardashians, but what the pictures were around that because of what the episodes were about. And then I took more aspirin, and then I went to bed, and and then everything began settling down even more because everything was beginning to continue to discharge out of my system. So that was when my body, I called it the collapsing day. That was when my body decided, hey, we're not going to do anything today. We're going to let your system finally stand down a little bit. And you're going to the couch, and you're going to remember you haven't watched the Kardashians in a long time, and you're going to search it, and you're going to pull it up. Like, that's kind of what my parts were doing, because after this very long, intense cycle of survival, okay, my nervous system needed to do something that was a day of doing nothing. And I had to get there because I had been tasking and doing all of these things, preparing for the trip and getting my body back in balance. And so it was so nice to sit there because there was nothing that was a depressive energy or laziness or disassociating from anything. I was actually in what I called a decompression of my neurological system. And watching the Kardashians, I could just zone out and just, be in another reality while my reality was recalibrating itself. And sometimes in my Pisces, I know exactly what I'm doing because Pisces are very good at escaping. And I learned how to no longer escape, but intentionally, disassociate from certain realities at certain times in order for me to finish a reality that I've been living in, because we're always going in and out of different realities in different moments. And so my body realized, okay, this is the day it's going to happen. I no longer needed to stay alert. And this is when I was coming home to myself. So it was really good. And during that time frame, I was beginning to hear in this ear, differently. And my spiritual communication channels began heightening again. So I began hearing, in my head, oh, I'm going to start now losing weight. And I was just like, oh, well, this is good. Because when you're in a heightened survival mode and your body holds a lot of that energetic protection and you put on weight, well, you have to lose the energy, so you're not in tense mode all the time, because it wasn't a fat problem with me. It was an energetic issue with me. And so I knew okay, I have to let go of that energy, and then the mass of my body will begin to go back into a normal state, which I'm noticing is starting to happen. So I knew that my brain was beginning to shift from constantly feeling that I might be in a state of threat that I had to be on guard for, to where I was now in my future energy creating things from my own power, for what needed to come in next. So I was no longer having to ask myself, how am I going to survive this world out here in with my nervous system? It was asking me now, okay, how are you going to thrive, Shelby? What are you doing now? What is your body going to help bring to you now? So I was doing all of those reframes, with preparing for easel Mujeres, the massages, the chiropractic, the moving forward into my grooming, hair, nails, wax it, Brazilian wax, all of these things, right? And so I was like, okay. And then putting hiring someone to work my Queen of Total Wellness business for marketing, and the franchise opportunities, having the one conversation with the one franchise, and then preparing for the next one during our Isla Mujeres trip here this week, so it's like, these were the things that I was putting in to thrive. And so to lose weight now is the symbolism of, okay, I'm now safe in my body. I'm now softening back into my organic roots of who I am as a female and male, okay, energetically, that I'm expanding because I don't need the weight, compacting into me now. I need it, expanding outside of me, and things have started to become easier. So things don't seem so hard anymore. Things just seem to be easing up. And it wasn't that I was changing anything in my diet necessarily. I just knew at some point in time that the biology is going to change its state because my energy is changing its state. So I knew, and I even told Joe this, I was like, until the energy changes, my body's not going to change. And once the energy changes and I begin noticing what my body's going to do, then I can get an idea of where I'm headed after that. And I even said to Joe at one point, multiple times in this experience, that when I was married in my 20s, I got married at 26, I gained 30 pounds pretty quick. Well, I wouldn't say quick. I would probably gain it in the second year. And I didn't change anything. I was working out literally 4 to 5 days a week. I was teaching school. I was eating really balanced meals 3 times a day. I was doing my cardio. I was walking dogs. I was doing everything. Like, nothing in my lifestyle changed except I got married. And I put on 30 pounds, and it was not fat. And then when I got divorced, those 30 pounds came off within about a month. It just, whoosh, it just dropped. And that's how I knew, oh, wow, that was energetic protection that I had. I was on guard. So hindsight, now here it is, I get married again, and Joe and I both, we gain weight. And our mentor told us a long time ago, oh yeah, that's protection, until you move through what your nervous system is protecting itself from, not from each other necessarily, but whatever you're protecting yourself from, well, you're probably going to put on a little bit of weight. Okay. And then at the right time, everything starts to loosen back up. Because remember, especially when I'm with my twin flame, my twin partner, my person that's giving me all my shadows and mirrors, it takes time to move through these energies because you're in a spiritual, soul evolving process. Okay. So I'm already noticing that, my muscles aren't as tense. Even on the second massage that I had, like the first time I went in to do the massage again, she was like, "Oh, Shelby, you were so tight. You were so tight. Your muscles." I was like, I know. Even with Joe, when he went in the first time, "Oh, Joe, your muscles are so tight." And he's like, "Yeah." But the second time I went in, my muscles were way different. Okay. And I could tell. And then it just got better, right? On that third one. So it was like, I knew, okay, I am really letting go, because each massage is getting better. My muscles are softening. It was easier for me to take deeper breaths. I was sleeping more soundly at night. That's been a big one for me, is sleeping deeper. Even eating, I've always been a good eater in the sense of how I process in my digestive tract. But what I noticed is I wasn't emotionally being charged where I felt like after I ate, I had to poop. Does that make sense? Like, do you eat and then all of a sudden you're like, you feel like you're nervous and then you go to the bathroom because you feel like you have to poop? I knew for me that was a pattern of mine, because I was feeding myself in my emotions, which is your where you digest energy of emotion. So I learned, even when I'm eating, like, I don't have that urge or that urgency of like nervousness and I got to go to the bathroom. So I realized, oh, wow, I'm really changing these emotional triggers that I've had. My face, the inflammation is starting to go down. I'm using that blue light now therapy, that I have that device I talked about, I think, in one of my other episodes. But it's really helping. Now, when I had that flare up with everything in my ear and my jaw, oh yeah, it didn't matter what I did. It was like, whew, it was going to show the anger. But weight naturally shifts. Okay. That's the process that I'm in. And emotionally, I'm not having those urgent moments like I was just talking about. If I eat and I feel anxiety, like, I know it's like there's less urgency, there's less reactivity to things. I'm definitely less guarded emotionally. I'm present more with myself. I just kind of feel more like myself. Mentally, my thoughts are just calmer, like I'm not having to think about a lot of things. There's no real doom and gloom, because I can tell Joe ran a lot of that, and that's like almost non-existent now. It's very easy for us to make decisions now. Like, we don't feel like we're stuck or something's in the way or we're holding, out for something else. It's kind of like if we talk about something, it moves, that decision moves through. And then I've noticed that my intuition is definitely getting heightened. So if I think about something, it's now showing up, or, it's interesting, like that intuition is quieter because the channel is a lot clearer, especially with this whole thing with my ear coming back in together. So there's just a lot less psychic noise around me. I don't feel like I'm hearing a lot of things anymore in that vibration. It's just, I feel like it's more my vibration now, which gives me this awareness around me that feels grounded instead of unstable. So therefore, I know in my body, I have a deeper embodiment of me. Does that make sense? So I'm moving away from protection and moving into creation, which is what I've been knowing that has needed to happen. And now it's like finally happening. Okay. So I have to admit, though, it did and does kind of feel strange, because when you're in survival mode, you're like, sometimes you feel disoriented, or you feel quiet a lot, or you feel like you're moving slow, even though you're moving fast. Sometimes you don't even have emotions. You're just kind of neutral in it. but being in the chaos is very familiar and you know how to function in the chaos. But peace is kind of unfamiliar at first. And so you're not necessarily losing the edge. You're actually gaining more of your life. And I think even in my psychic, I just reversed what I said. Like, survival mode is not disoriented, quiet, or slow or whatever. It's actually when the peace comes in, you feel more quiet. So even in my psychic brain, I just reversed all that. When you're peaceful, you do feel more quiet. You do slow down. You do kind of feel like you don't know where you're at. Okay. Because the chaos was familiar. Because in survival mode, you're always in the chaos. So that has been a reframe for me. So much so that I just reversed what I was trying to say, because my psychic went weird. All right. But to sum all of this up, I guess, is really I had to learn in my deeper truth that my body has been the last to know that, hey, you're safe. Even if my soul knew I was safe, even if my mind knew I was safe, even if I knew my life was changing, my body is kind of ancient right now compared to, all the other processes I've been going through. So it's like the body is always the last to catch up. So it was only going to begin to stand down from war when it knew, hey, you're no longer in the war. Okay. And now I'm beginning to see that, oh, my body really is standing down. It really is just breathing again, and all of my channels, are harmonizing themselves, I guess, is the easiest way to say it. So I'm safe, right? Like this is good. This is good. And now I can be in this body and be in my energy and be around other people and know that all of the personal crap of my soul evolution of things that I've needed to harmonize masculine, feminine wise, that I've been with Joe to go down these rabbit holes at deeper levels. Because when you have a partner in, you're doing a whole other gamut of it. Okay. You're not just doing you when you're single. When you have the partner, you're like, oh my God, it's a whole other ball game. All right. Because they bring things up that, because you're so much more intimate with them, it brings more things up. So I was like, okay. Yeah. Wow. I think what I've talked about for over a decade, I'm finally stepping into it. So I told myself, none of this has to do with laziness. I'm becoming regulated. Thank you, God. Finally. And none of this is about collapsing anything. This is about, hey, I have arrived at Shelby. I have arrived at this destination. I have arrived at this next level of myself. And this is what actual healing looks like. Okay. Regardless of what layer of the onion you're on. So I hope this really resonated with you if you're listening to this today, that something in your world that you're going through or have gone through, that this is just giving you that extra cushioning for yourself or integration of yourself, because we're all doing this somewhere on some level. And when we share that story, we're sharing the frequency of our experiences, and that frequency does help other people. So I really hope that whatever I was able to transmit through this episode, that you're able to pick that up and integrate that into your energetic body and really help harmonize in you things that maybe you don't even know need harmonizing, okay? Because then it just makes your next step even easier. So I'm going to leave it there and have a great day. And I will be back the same time, same place next week. Talk to you then.